Welcome to the Lobster Talks podcast by Lobster Capital, where we celebrate the bold thinkers and innovators driving change in the startup world. I'm your host, Gabriel Jarrison, and today I'm thrilled to have Luke Bogus, the founder and CEO of FanCave, a revolutionary platform that's changing the landscape of college sports recruiting. Luke, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Looking forward to this.
Awesome. Look, we're going to talk about FanCave. FanCave is really exciting, on the verge of a lot of regulatory change and pretty unique what you're doing. So before FanCave, you were head of product for Vial, a Series B life science tech startup, helping 0 a new clinical trial infrastructure that now generates millions in ARR. So that's, pretty cool. You have a very cool background and you're a product manager at Microsoft as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to the idea of FanCave.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. That's part of the fun, I guess. For me, the story all begins, FanCave and kind of my, tech journey back. I grew up in a smaller town in Nebraska, about 20,000 people. And really all there was to do there was just, drive 50 miles southeast to Lincoln, Nebraska to watch Cornhusker football. And so I did that with my dad. My dad went with his dad for years. And so he had season tickets. I rode along to all the games with them from when I was like 5 years old all the way up through college. I went to school at the University of Nebraska. I was even in their marching band there. So I loved band at the time. I still do, but also it was an excuse to, have front row seats to all the football games because the band goes on the field and gets to play during the games, which is a blast. And so it's funny how now unknowingly I was doing user research for years, being involved in, the 90,000 person stadium, but I digress. It was interesting, thinking about everything you said, like Microsoft and had a product and stuff, none of that was even in the realm of possibilities kind of when I grew up. All I knew, if I wanted to have a tech career in my smaller town, it was you could be the IT guy for the local business down the road. Or if you want to start a startup, that's start a coffee shop or something, which again, both noble career paths, but I just my worldview at the time was just, I didn't even know what software engineering was. I didn't know what code was. I didn't even know what venture capital meant. I didn't know people could give you money to just pursue your dreams. And so that was something that I discovered when I was in college. That's actually also where I met my co-founder, Nick. We hadn't worked together until now. We were really good friends in college, but it's funny how it just kind of all comes together where, when you're growing up, all I loved was Husker football. And then I fell in love with the world of technology. And then fast forward through my time at Microsoft and, helping be an early product hire at Vial. Yeah, just it's crazy to fast forward and having just graduated Y Combinator and trying to do the startup thing myself. So having a blast. We started FanCave just this January. And again, it was kind of born from this love of college sports that I and my co-founder, Nick, has had. He grew up in Kansas City, so he was kind of around this idea of sports. We adopted him as a Husker when he came to Nebraska, and that's kind of how we've kept in touch over the years since we graduated and we went our separate ways. We just talk about Husker football, and I think that's an interesting reflection about sports in general, right? It's there's the action on the field, but really 90% of sports fandom is what happens off the field. It's the conversation about how the game went last week, how the game's going to go this week, the speculation of who's going to win, placing your bets on the over-under, doing all this stuff outside of the stadium is oftentimes more fun than what happens inside of the stadium. So that's kind of the headwinds that we're, building off of towards on FanCave is all this outside of the stadium conversations around sports. And as you mentioned, kind of some of this regulatory headway that I can certainly talk about kind of makes it a perfect time for us to start FanCave in a space that Nick and I are, hyper passionate about.
That's absolutely awesome. Like you mentioned, and it's everyone on this pod, you just graduated from YC Winter 24. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And, now people are wondering what exactly is FanCave? I mean, I'm on the edge of my seat. Tell us exactly what you're doing. And maybe you can then go back and tell us how you came to that idea. You mentioned regulatory change, so I'm sure that was a big drive.
Yeah, so there's kind of two big headwinds that we're fighting towards. Well, effectively what FanCave is we're turning fans into recruiters for their favorite college teams. There's this entire new world where the 90,000 strong that fill the stadium, the millions of people that watch at home can now do their part in actually building the team that's on the field. It happens through kind of two core ways. As I mentioned, Nick and I have been friends for years, and we've been watching this movement from the sidelines where college athletes are actually starting to get paid now. Before 2021, there would be merch with these athletes' names on it. They would do autograph sessions, meet and greets, and they wouldn't see a dime of it. It would all just go to the university's athletic department and they would make $0. Yes, they got their scholarship, but people were making millions off of their name, image, and likeness, and athletes couldn't make a dime off of that. And that was because of rules sanctioned by the NCAA, which is the governing body for collegiate sports throughout the entire country. And finally, through a series of lawsuits, pretty much in basically July of 2021, it became legal for athletes to monetize themselves, to monetize off of their name, image, and likeness. That's why you've seen this huge trend in athletes, selling their autographs. They're now doing commercials and social media endorsements. That was illegal before 2021, and now it's actually legal. And really, since 2021, tons of rules and regulations have changed to allow it to be, more friendly and easier and better guardrails for athletes to finally be valued for the value that they provide on the field. And so that's kind of one headwind, is this world that college athletes can finally get paid now. That's on the athlete side. On the fan side, what's really interesting is kind of this nuance in college sports where any other sports league in the world, whether it be soccer or NFL, players are told where they have to play. There are drafts, you're traded, you're cut, you sign 10-year extensions, right? You're around forever. But all at the end of the day, you sign these multi-year contracts. But at the end of the day, you can get cut at any point, you can get traded, and then obviously you're drafted from college to the pros. And so you're told where you have to play. In college, though, you're a college student, right? You're a 17-year-old high school senior, and you're deciding what college you want to go to. And by nature of that, you're also deciding what college team you're going to take your talents to. And so there's this world where the athlete actually decides where they go to school, and they have a ton of leverage and decision making to do while they're high school juniors and seniors before they choose what college they want to basically commit to, which is really interesting. And the other part of recruitment in college sports is really interesting that, like I said, Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback from Kansas City, can sign a 10-year extension. Well, in college, you're a college student, so you have 4 years. So your athletic career is 4 years long, which also means that the roster for your team actually cycles through every 4 years because you graduate, right? And so that also means that every year, the roster changes as well. You have seniors that graduate, you have new freshmen that come in, high school athletes that come in to try to be really good for your team and impact your roster. And so this idea of recruitment is hyper important because, unlike the pros where you can just sign extensions on the best players, you're going to lose your best players after at least 4 years. And so it's hyper imperative that you're bringing in great high school senior recruiting classes to be freshmen so that they are, top talent athletes and that ideally they impact the team and the best players are the best teams and the best teams win championships. And so that's kind of the other headwind, is that there's this very interesting world of recruitment that does not exist really in any other sport. And, there's the coaches on the field, right, that call the plays and try to, make the team win. But behind the coaches off the sidelines, there's this army of recruiters and analysts and folks on the staff that are watching game films and flying out to high school Friday night light football games in random towns to try to find the diamond in the rough talent. And there is tons of talent across the country for high school football and other high school sports, obviously. But there's an entire army of folks who are trying to find the right talent, give them scholarships, and try to entice them to come to their school. And so the teams know that it's super important to make sure you always have a cycle of top tier talent coming into your program. And equally on top of that, fans understand that too. And so what's really interesting is that while the recruiting staff can identify top talent and then try to entice them to come to their school, all fans can do is just identify top talent as well. They, hear the murmurs of what athletes these recruiting staffs are looking into, and on message boards, on subreddits, on Twitter, on Facebook, they're having all this dialogue and conversation around top tier high school athletes. And is this guy going to come to my school, or are they going to go to our rival? And people debating about how should we get this wide receiver or that wide receiver? And so there's always this energy and conversation around the recruitment process. But until today, fans couldn't do anything about that. They weren't allowed to talk to athletes during the recruitment process. They could only just kind of stay in their echo chamber and cross their fingers that these athletes would actually come to their favorite school. So when you mold all of this together, this energy around the recruitment process, the importance that recruitment is the number one thing that matters in making your college team successful, and then this whole headwind around athletes can finally get paid. We're trying to intersect all of that and let high school athletes understand their value before they get to college, and actually helping fans play a part in building their dream teams. And so when you pull all that together, we're building FanCave to allow fans to be recruiters for their favorite team. We let fans interact directly with top recruits through, messages, chats, reacts. But then we also have a module that's almost like the Kickstarter for college athletics, so to speak, where fans can actually pledge money to recruits contingent on enrollment. The fans, want to sweeten the pot and have the highest bidding offer so that it's the most enticing offer for the best recruits to come to your school, which is, again, something that's only legally possible thanks to a lot of this regulation change that's happened over the last few years.
And that's really, really cool. Basically, if there's, 1 million fans and they all really, really want that player. They all pledge just $1, but then there's $1 million. It's a signing bonus, and as soon as the player signs, he just gets the money. That's it.
Yeah, effectively so. There's some nuances there. There's a lot of regulation still that's required around how you pay out these athletes and some other specifics there. But the gist is right, where basically fans can actually pool their money together, use that as an incentive to say, if you come to my school, you can claim these NIL offers, as they're called.
It's really cool. That's really cool. I mean, maybe I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but there's not much greater motivator than money for pretty much anyone in the world. It is what it is. Maybe it's wrong or evil, and maybe they just should play for other reasons, but it actually works. And so have you launched? And if yes, what's the impact on recruiting? I don't know if there's a recruiting season, but I'd be curious to know. I'm sure it's going to tip the balance, going to tip the decision for a lot of players as soon as it actually, starts happening.
Yeah. And, before we even launch this, you're right. I think one interesting thing is that there's this whole new emerging space around money is now involved in the recruitment process, which, years ago that wasn't possible. And now it's questioning, should it be? But at the same time, when you think about it, it should be a business decision for some of these athletes. A lot of these athletes that we've talked to, they are maybe first generation college students. They are staring down the barrel of making the most money that their family has ever seen, an opportunity for generational wealth, which in the past, your goal was you try to go to a college so that you can grind for 4 years to maybe get invited to the NFL draft, to maybe get drafted, to maybe make the roster, to maybe make it on the field, and then maybe make your money. That's a lot of maybes. And so what's happening now, you have families and high school seniors who are staring down the barrel of life-changing money. And, if you were looking to do the same job for 3x the income here or 1/3 the income there, most people would probably choose the exact same job for 3x the income, right? And so finally, these folks have opportunities and they can actually finally get valued for the value that they provide in the field, which is super exciting, and not have to wait for all these what ifs to maybe have an opportunity to make life-changing money. You can actually make life-changing money off of your talents from day one. And so that's like the kind of the positive note that we're really kind of forging ahead on. And we've had about 30 4- and 5-star athletes resonate with that. And so we did launch a couple months ago. We've been hyper-focused right now, and just thank you, on building a brand that athletes trust. Obviously we are dudes on the internet trying to help high school athletes make money. It could come off as poor, but what we're hyper focused on is a brand that resonates, building trust with these athletes. We're reaching out to them, talking to them on the phone, talking to their parents and their agents in some cases. I'm just trying to build a relationship and build trust, because we believe that fans are hyper competitive and fans really want them to come to their school. And we really want to connect to those loyal fans with that athlete to help that athlete understand and maximize their NIL monetary value. And so, since launch, we've had about 30 4- and 5-star athletes, verified and onboarded through the product. And we're really excited for this recruitment season that's just about to kick off here in a couple of weeks. Kind of the summer season is when a lot of these, athletes start to do their official visits and narrow down their school lists and make their final decisions. And so ideally, we're in a prime place to, be on the ground floor there.
Do you already have some money pledged for some athletes?
Yeah, we've done a few beta tests on this. We're still iterating on exactly what the right UX is for how to basically interact fans with those athletes. We've done some testing. We have a few $1,000s raised in some of our, pilot programs that we've done, which is really promising. And so, we kind of have this interesting world of this marketplace, right? We're trying to crank the wheel on athletes, which we believe is the supply side, and fans, which is the demand side. And I think one thing that we are honest with ourselves about is there are a lot of sports tech products in the space, and there are a lot of products that have a ton of athletes onboarded. Because when you think about it, getting athletes on board actually isn't the hard part. For a lot of these other companies out there, we're not the first NIL software company. There are other companies out there that are trying to help athletes make money just in different parts of the athletic journey. And of course, if you're an athlete and an app says, hey, you want to make money? Who's not going to sign up for that, right? And so a lot of these other products have thousands and thousands of athletes. But one thing that we feel convicted on is at the end of the day, the money only comes from the people, the demand side, right? And the demand side for us are the fans. And so at the end of the day, our product needs to be something that fans truly love, a product that is sticky. Obviously we are kind of staring down the barrel of building a consumer product, which we're super pumped about. But, we're trying to basically make the flywheel spin faster by kind of hacking the supply side, so to speak. I think we're inspired by Uber in the early days basically did a ton of manual work on the supply side to make sure that there were a ton of drivers and that the drivers were paid X amount by default, such that when users finally started using the product, they weren't waiting 30 minutes for a ride, because who would use that product? Uber knew that the only way that the demand side could take off is if the supply side was locked in and ready to go. They had metrics like rides couldn't be longer than 10 minutes and all these other things. And so we're inspired there where our supply side is the athlete. We want to have like a great subset of athletes, which we do, kind of those 4 and 5 stars, which we believe then will kind of turn on the jets for the fan engagement side. And we don't think we could do that fan engagement side until we had the supply side ready. The craziness of marketplaces. It's crazy, but it's a lot of fun.
That's why marketplaces are so hard. And it's super interesting what you just reminded the story of Uber at the beginning. They would pay drivers to just drive around empty, just so that if you open the app, there's actually someone available. Because of course, there's no one on the app at the beginning if the drivers would never show up if they're not paid. So they just paid them to drive around. That's really cool. It's a great inspiration for you to take from. And so I'm getting from what you said that you don't yet have $1 million pot for a player, but I'm sure, just like you said, you're attracting top players. I'm sure it's going to come rather quickly once people see there's a major player on the market, and then everyone's going to go crazy for that player and they're going to pledge money. And I wanted to ask you, but maybe we do a second recording of the podcast, a year, 2 years from now. It would be interesting to see if a player always goes with where there's the most money. Sometimes maybe, it's closer to home or it's a team that they love and they could leave money on the table. I'm guessing if the player doesn't end up going, the money's refunded. That's what you kind of mentioned?
Correct. Yeah. Basically, the money, we effectively hold it until the athlete makes their enrollment decision. And then we recredit the folks on our platform for the schools that he didn't go to. So yeah, if he chooses Nebraska and then 7 other teams basically had money fundraised for him, then that money gets recredited. And then he's able to claim the MIL offers from the school he goes to.
That's also a good business model for you because you could potentially hold money for months and months and months. You exactly know the date where the final decision is going to be. So you can do all sorts of things with that money to make the money work for you. So that's pretty cool. I want to go back to regulatory world. It seems, you've mentioned it several times, it seems to be a very regulatory heavy environment. It seems to be new and constantly evolving. How are you managing that? Startup life is so difficult already, but you have on top of everything else, something super heavily regulated, something changing. What's the recipe for you here? How do you keep your head above water?
Yeah, that's a great question. For us, I think it all comes down to just conviction. I think we had the opportunity to work with Dalton as our group partner. And one of the things he talked a bunch about was just, most of startups is just managing your psychology. Effectively, if you can just stay motivated long enough and just not quit and not die, the startup will probably work out, right? I mean, that's very, very generalized. But if you think about it, right, like a lot of startups end with, co-founder conflict or just losing interest in the problem space or feeling that, it's not going to work and we're just going to give up. And so, I think a lot of it comes down to just us really digging into the problem space. Before we even built a line of code, we talked to hundreds of athletes and fans and athletic departments and booster clubs and big donors who have participated in this world of NIL before. And we kind of need to understand the problem space to feel hyper convicted about building in an emerging regulatory environment. So that was number one, just convincing ourselves that the problem exists and that the way that we want to approach the problem is probable, even in this midst of staring down the barrel of different settlements and different preliminary injunctions and court cases that theoretically could end what we're doing tomorrow. But I think, when you zoom out, we are thankful that we're building in a space that, a lot of other industries, maybe you're one lawsuit away from it all just being over or from something to just completely shut down. I think this idea that athletes deserve to be valued for the value that they provide in the field is not that contentious of a topic. And thankfully, when you actually look at the track record from all the regulation changes and court rulings that have happened since that original change in July 2021, they've all been pretty positive. Positive meaning they've expanded the ways and the opportunities that athletes can get paid. There's been more guardrails and rules about how they can get paid. And so there's kind of more of a defined playbook, so to speak, that has come out of every piece of regulation. And so I think one, it's also just being confident about the fact that, A, again, you're convicted on your idea. B, to use your context clues to understand kind of the regulatory history and where you think things are going. But at the end of the day, it just kind of all comes down to just confidence and conviction about the problem that you're trying to solve, which for us, it's helping athletes understand the value that they deserve to be paid. And so if everything starts there, then, you can kind of cut out the noise and, not get scared about the things that could or could not happen.
That's really cool. What I'm hearing from you is you started with kind of a philosophical statement. We think players should be valued more. And then FanCave is only kind of the solution to this statement, but you didn't start with the business or the business model or the website or the company. You actually start with a statement. That's actually really, really cool. There's a lot of companies, when you think of, Airbnb, their statement is, make everyone at home anywhere in the world, something like this. You never know if this is kind of marketing that came about after, or, Facebook is like connecting the world or whatever. For you, we can be sure it's not marketing. It was there from day one. And that's really cool. It means your product can even potentially evolve into something else as long as it answers to that philosophy, which ties perfectly into my next question. Perfect transition. Wow, it's like I'm born to be a podcast host. I wanted to ask you if also you're thinking of Web3, because in sports, there's a lot of Web3 products. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Web3. I'm a fan of crypto, but I think most cases people put Web3 into places where it doesn't bring any value. In your very case, it could actually probably really bring tangible value with, I'm thinking of So Rare, this French unicorn of collectibles on soccer. Maybe the players could sell NFTs and you could get, access of, behind the scenes of the match, something like this. Are you thinking about this? Do you think it's part of your product roadmap at some point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, never say never. I will say, when the NIL became legalized in July 2021, that was kind of the first crop of startups that really came out of that was, allowing athletes to create digital trading cards and putting that on chain, et cetera. A majority of those have fizzled out, but I think a lot of the principles that you're saying are definitely possible, whether or not it's a Web3 application or not, to be determined. But kind of this concept that fans want to be closer to the action, and fans specifically want to be closer to the players that they very much care about. I think that's like kind of one big concept that we believe in. And so, whether that be, recorded on through NFTs and collectibles or not, or whether that be through digital interactions that are facilitated through our product, we've heard of other products where you can, FaceTime with athletes, or you can have private DMs with athletes. And I think just like fans are really hungry for this idea of connecting with, the athletes they care about. Loving your team is one thing, but really caring about the player is another thing. A lot of times I've talked to friends in the pro sports space where they love LeBron James. They don't care where LeBron James is playing, but they want to just be obsessed about him and his lifestyle and what he's up to, and which is awesome. That's a huge subset of fans. And we believe that there's like a similar world to that in the world of high school recruitment where, I as a fan believe that our quarterback is not very good and we need a better quarterback. And so I maybe really fixate on this, 5-star quarterback from Georgia that I really think should come to my school. And I will do anything that it takes to get him to come to my school. And I have many thousands of other fans who feel the same way. And so I think that's kind of the area that we're definitely testing is, allowing those fans to connect with those athletes, having those athletes feel that level of love and support, because like you mentioned earlier in the show, like it's not just about money. I mean, money is one thing, but future upside and future potential is another thing. And we, just their general market value, you can get paid X. So if you're going to a place where your fans don't care about you, your market, your future upside might not be there versus, maybe if it's lesser money, but if the fan base really loves and supports you and knows you specifically and cares about you specifically, your future earning potential may be, off the charts. And so I think that's kind of the space that we're exploring right now.
That's awesome. You've been mentioning several times, it's obvious that basically you're bringing a new product to help the fans into their fans' journey. You're helping them becoming even better fans or, spending even more time and energy on their team, which is amazing. That's all they want. I'm thinking to myself two things. One, I'm thinking you basically sort of have your work cut out for you because those fans already spend so much time and energy on their team. When they're going to, see your product, they're going to go crazy for it. But I wanted to ask you the question, one, where do all those fans congregate online? Is it, you mentioned Reddit, is it Instagram? But more importantly, what I'd love to hear your thought on is, what's your strategy as a startup to kind of infiltrate those, it's got to be social media, right? It's got to be Instagram and Reddit. How do you, become part of the conversation? Don't be too kind of heavy on the advertising. You just want to be kind of a team player yourself. How are you thinking about this? Because I'm sure this is a topic a lot of startups are thinking about.
Yeah. I think, the best advice that we kind of got is when you're building a product in the early days, you have to like really find your early adopters in your niche. And sometimes like when you're talking about your company, or at least when we're talking about ours, I think to myself, is this too niche? Like, are we building for too small of a niche? But you'd rather build something that 10 people love versus having a million people kind of like. right? Because that 10 people loving it can expand to them telling their friends who might also love it. And so there's just a lot of upside potential focusing on, the small subset of people that just love your product in the early days, building it exactly for them versus just building like a generalized, non-opinionated product for the masses, because the masses won't care. You'd rather have a small group of people really care versus a large group of people kind of care. I think that's maybe something that Brian Chesky talks a lot about. But all to be said with that, this kind of world of rabid fans who really care about recruitment, it is a smaller subset when you think about this concept of millions of fans watching at home, but it's not actually that small of a subset. These conversations happen in a lot more places than you might think. They happen publicly on Twitter. There's like an entire sphere of like Twitter burner accounts where people just like, have anonymous profiles and they just like talk about the games. They live tweet during the games and they talk during the recruitment season and speculate about guys. But in addition to that, there's actually conversations on subreddits. And then there's this concept of recruiting message boards. So there's actually a lot of huge kind of media companies out there that exist solely to cover recruitment. On3 is an emerging one, Rivals, 24/7 Sports. These are just like media outlets that their sole job is they cover high school recruits. They rank them. They give them star ratings, 3, 4, and 5 stars. They do interviews and podcasts with them. They create blogs about certain teams and trending players. They create, crystal ball predictions where these expert analysts, predict where these guys are going to land. And fans pay for this content. They pay for, paywalled podcasts and these blogs and these predictions. And in addition to that, they pay for access to these message boards, which are just like white labeled subreddits. And there's tons of conversations happening about, as I mentioned, when a guy gets a scholarship offer from your team, people hop into the message boards and say, I've been watching his high school film and he's a beast. I'm like, man, we really need to come here. I see he also might be going to this school. There's no way that he can go to that school. He needs to come to our school. And you see these long threads of people just discussing these high school recruits, basically begging for them to come to their school. And obviously we want to be the action arm and all of that energy. But all to be said, us implanting our conversations in these message boards has been really important. I mentioned the concept of the burner accounts on Twitter, and a lot of these message board accounts are also anonymous. Us working with a lot of these like super fans, there are definitely, Twitter accounts that have more followers for Nebraska fans than others. There's definitely message boards accounts that are a lot more active than others, of course, that have higher karma, etc. Us partnering with them kind of like an influencer type model where if they're already discussing these things about, hey, we really need to get this guy to come to our school, by us pairing an action with that to say, and so I have now pledged X amount of dollars to have him come to our school. Here's the link. Join me in that endeavor. We've kind of done some, partnerships in that way. So I think all to be said, thankfully we're in a space where for that kind of like hyper niche group, there's already a ton of conversation happening, whether it be on message boards, Twitter, Facebook groups, us implanting ourselves into that conversation. And for us by ways of, we're in the conversation because we're fans, we're subscribed to those message boards because that's who Nick and I are. We're rabid fans. But in addition to that, trying to partner and become friends with kind of the moderators and, kind of the top fans who have the most activity in those spaces and having them become our friends, them enjoying the product enough to organically share it has kind of been a recipe for success so far.
And that's really cool. I think if I would sum it up, and again, I think it's a question a lot of entrepreneurs are asking themselves. It's basically, be part of the conversation. Obviously, go where the fans are, be part of the conversation, and be constructive. Like you said, it's not about be like, hey, this is FanCave. No, it's like, I want this player, so I have pledged that money. Here's the link. It's really kind of part of the conversation because you've built something that inserts itself really well into what already exists. And you're not just trying to, plug it in the middle like, hey, FanCave is the solution. You got to be thoughtful about it. So that's great advice for people watching or listening.
And if I can add one thing to that, it's also kind of like a microcosm too of just like this broader startup advice that I really believe in, which is I mentioned earlier that mastering of psychology is a big part of, starting a company, but also just like staying internally motivated is like the number one thing that I've found to be most important. Whether it's during your fundraising journey where you're being told, tons and tons of no's, or whether, you strike out for the 10th time on that sales pitch, or whether you have a bunch of customers churn, like you're going to be faced with a lot of like things that could negatively impact your morale. And so you have to find ways to actually internally motivate yourself. And I have found that our biggest hack anyway is just by loving the problem space. I was born and raised in this world of college sports. I've been a college sports fan since I was a kid. I am one of those people on those message boards and in these conversations on Twitter. And so it's very organic for me to be in these conversations. It's very organic for me to think about the way that these fans are thinking. I'm building a product that I would want in the world. It's up to the world to decide what they think about it, but it is up to me to build a product that I truly love and I truly believe in and I'm motivated to build on. So just like you said, in planning yourself in a conversation, not in a sales way, you'll find that it becomes not a sales motion if you just genuinely care about the problem, if you genuinely care about the community, and if you actually add value to the community, which I think that I do because I am one of those community members because I am just an average fan kind of at the baseline. Yes, sure, I'm starting a company in the space, but it all started for me being one of those crazy fans. So if you start from a place that you love, it's crazy how that permeates through a lot of other parts of the startup journey.
That's something I really want to double click on because it's one of my favorite topics. It's not prepared. I didn't know you were going to say that, but it really is one of my favorite topics. I'm at the very end of a 10 million raise for my fund. And it's a question I've been asking myself a lot is how do you, stay motivated because it's a long process. And for a fund, a startup, it's taking a couple weeks, maybe 1 or 2 months. For a fund, it's usually, 12 to 24 months. And, how do you stay motivated? I found a lot of great things. And I'm actually coaching some people, some now emerging fund managers and helping them mostly with this, with, getting your head straight. But your answer is something probably even better than what I teach them. So I want to kind of explore that. My answer to them is just, you can kind of decide it. It's like, you don't even give yourself a choice. Whenever you're feeling bad, you just be like, you decide, well, now I'm feeling good. Your thing is so much better. So let's dive in. You're saying if it comes from a passion of yours, if it comes from deep down, from way before, you don't even need to stay motivated. It's intrinsic in your being. You're going to stay motivated no matter what. That's so fascinating. It reminds me of my entrepreneurial journey. I really started having success as a founder when I was working on a startup that was close to my interest. And before, it was not something that I cared about, and the startup was not really going well. The question I want to ask you, there's a lot of, I've heard it thousands of times, you've heard it as well. Some people are like, I want to start something, I want to start a business, but I don't have anything that I'm passionate about enough so that I can create a business. Or I'm passionate about traveling or TV shows, which is most likely, a universe where it's really difficult to start a business. What advice would you give to such person? Not me, obviously, but someone who would have that question to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, even just thinking back before we even started FanCave, I think Nick and I started at the same exact journey. We're like, all right, our jobs are like kind of fulfilling, but we're building in spaces that we're kind of passionate about. We want to build in a space that we're really passionate about, or at least do something that we're really passionate about. So we should start a company. The classic, let's just start a company. And in that moment, I remember one of the big definitive things we talked about was starting in a space that at the end of the day, we're building a product that we really enjoy. I think a lot of founders are maybe trying to find that get rich quick hack or the thing that just like obviously makes sense or the first idea that comes to you, which is great. But what I find that tends to have people lean towards in this world where they're just like instantly starting to hack on an MVP. They instantly just start building and they have this like idea that they're just like, this product sounds really cool. I bet it can make a lot of money. They're starting to do the math about, all right, well, if I charge this month and MRR is this, and all I need is X number of customers to make $1 million. Like you just jump too deep into this idea that if this product exists and if I make this amount of money, then I'm going to be a founder superstar. But all of that is missed by just this idea that like, what do people want? I think that's just like the number one training that YC teaches you is just make something people want. And so for us, it's like, we want to make something that we wanted. And even if it's something that we wanted, we had to make sure that we didn't fall in love with the solution. I think one big risk when we're kind of building consumer is just having too much conviction and being too headstrong about this idea or this UI that we're just like super excited about. And we kind of block out the noise and build it and ship it. That's a huge risk in any startup's journey. And so just starting everything from just like something that you're interested in and then just jumping straight into conversations with people. I think the first thing that we did when we're like, we're going to build in the college sports space. We had a lot of opinions about what we could do, but the first thing we did was talk to some of our friends who work in athletics. We reached out to some people on LinkedIn who were former athletes, and we just like had general conversations about some of the struggles that they had. We know people that we talked to some athletes that were athletes before NIL was legal and then after NIL was legal, and we compared notes. Like that was just kind of the root of everything, was just listening. So I think all to be said is that I think you would be surprised about the number of hobbies and passions that maybe you actually have. That'd be the first piece of advice I'd have. It's just like, what are the things that like fire you up? Because at the end of the day, fast forward a year, 2 years in your startup, A, you definitely want to be living that long. You have to get, or living that long as a company, but B, you have to get to a point where, every day you're waking up just as pumped as yesterday. And I truly believe that the only way you can do that, metrics are great, but that stuff dies. The hit of, hitting your X thousandth user or your millionth dollar or whatever, that comes and goes. But this feeling of just like being hyper passionate about the problem space, that sticks there forever. And so some people are trying to find the get rich quick ideas, which is awesome and noble, and that's definitely cool. But for us, I think we found that our motivation hack has just been, building in a space in which we're just true hobbyists.
That's so cool. I mean, thank you for that insight. I love it. I could try to sum it up by saying people want to start a company in a topic that they don't like, but often they don't know what they're passionate about. And your solution is talk to users. That's what YC tells you to do. They say you should talk to users every week or every day, because YC's thing is make something people want. So you need to talk to them. You need to ask them. And actually, this is how you become passionate about the problem. So how you become passionate is you're trying to solve it for people that you're talking to that have that problem. I had Anna Berger from Trade on the pod, and she said the same thing. She said, I had fire inside of me because I was talking to them every day. I knew they had the problem. And even though she faced rejection after rejection, she just knew the problem was there. So that's really, really fascinating. Thank you so much for that. Speaking of fundraising, you just oversubscribed your fundraise. Congratulations. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and what you learned along the way?
Yeah, it's funny. This is my first time trying to raise money for an idea. And when I was talking to a bunch of founders and doing some of the YC coaching, they're talking, quote, you'll probably talk to hundreds of investors. And I just kind of assumed that was just hyperbole. I'm like, no one's actually having 100 meetings. Yeah, you definitely have 100 meetings. The yes to no ratio is kind of large. And I think that, I've talked a lot about managing your psychology. I think one of the hardest parts about fundraising is that it's all consuming. You think that you can do a couple calls here and then work, talk to some users there and then work on the sales pitch here and work on your company. No, you have to just fully focus and engross yourself into the fundraising journey because of a couple things. The biggest being that, the way that the fundraising goes should not have any impact on your business decisions or the way that you feel convicted about the product and the company. I mean, I think it's the most exhausting and exhilarating part of my founder journey so far. I've just been doing, over 100 conversations with, VCs and angels. And it's crazy to, stare in the face of a bunch of rejections and you have to still be convicted about the thing. You go into these conversations and say the same thing 100 times pretty much. And you answer the same questions pretty much the same way. And, people love it. Some people hate it. And you still have to just have that baseline level of conviction and excitement about what you're doing. And so I think that's just been the craziest thing to manage is, staring in the face of a lot of rejection, but still being just hyper convicted and managing yourself. And just knowing that it's a phase that comes and goes. Fundraising is a means to give you leverage to work on your passions. It's not the thing. If you oversubscribe or if you don't raise anything or whatever, I mean, the dollar amount that you raise has no indication on product market fit. It just has an indication on doing the math and how long you can try to achieve product market fit. And so if you just think about fundraising in a bubble and, not let that impact your, other founders who are hard at work doing the working on the company, not letting those emotions seep through to them and not letting you second guess your opinions and all the work that you've done and all the, conversations that you've had with users, not letting those 30-minute conversations seep in and question your conviction was kind of one of the more challenging parts of the journey. And I didn't master it. I definitely had to still work with myself on that, but that was definitely the biggest thing that I learned.
I'm sure it's tough. We just talked about it. You get 5 no's the same day and you got to be smiling and be motivated and oof.
Oh yeah.
Not easy.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But going back to the problem and to the internal, the fire that you have in you. Okay. I kind of wanted to ask you about YC's impact, but I mean, we've mentioned, we can skip that because we've been taping for quite a while and we've talked about it. YC helps you make something people want to talk to your users. So let's move on to kind of the end of pod questions, something I ask almost every time. Is there either a quote or a book that you recommend to people or potentially had a big impact on you and your life?
Yeah, there's this book called Designing Your Life that I actually find myself reading every couple of years. I've gifted that book the most. It's basically 2 professors at Stanford that provide, basically implement the idea of design sprints to your life. And so the entire concept is how do you construct and build a life that you're truly excited about and passionate about? The book's some learning, but also some workbooks around the first chapter is all about gauging from a scale of 0 to 10, how do you feel about your relationships? How do you feel about your work? And then having that guide the rest of the book, which is kind of planning out your 5-year Odyssey plan and thinking about your future. And the entire premise is that, I think a lot of folks stumble on life and they just happen to be somewhere and they look back and say, how did I get here? For some folks, it goes great. And then for some folks, it could have gone greater if they maybe had taken a step back, thought about what they liked in their life, thought about what they wanted in their next 5 years and plan accordingly. So the entire book's like a nice workbook into what are you actually passionate about? What do you want your next 5, 10, 15 years of your life to look like? And what are actionable steps that you can do to get there? And so I read it every couple of years. I've gifted it a lot. Designing Your Life. It's a really good book.
That's absolutely awesome. Thank you very much. I really want to read it now, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. Thank you for that recommendation. I'll read it soon. And for our listeners who want to, keep in touch with you, with FanCave, where can they find you? Where can they find FanCave online?
Yeah, you can find FanCave on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, at FanCave Team. We're trying to pump out a lot of content, which has been a journey in and of itself, but a blast. So definitely follow along there. The product's live. If you're a college sports fan, we'd love to have you join in to help build your dream teams with your fellow fans. Fancave.me is the website. Feel free to create an account. And if you are a high school athlete or a high school athlete who basically wants to capitalize and understand the journey of NIL, send us our way. We're always looking to collaborate with future stars.
That's awesome. Luke, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your story with us today.
Gabriel, this was awesome. Thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Brilliant. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe for more raw conversations like this. And don't forget to rate us and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time on the Lobster Talks, stay bold, stay curious, and remember, those big ideas start somewhere.